I'm sure a lot of people know that the big news last week, obviously, undoubtedly, was the announcement that Senator Manchin and Senator Schumer have a potentially viable infrastructure bill. At least at the time of recording this, it's potentially viable. Hopefully, it still is. But we'll get to that more with Matt Huber later. But just before that actually happened, both the House and the Senate passed what's called the CHIPS and Science Act, which was introduced to deal with the microchip and semiconductor shortage that you might be aware of. Obviously, microchips and semiconductors are a big part of cell phone production, of car production, of many medical devices. And it's been a large part of the supply chain issues that we've been dealing with for the last few years. So the bill that was just passed allocates tens of billions of dollars towards domestic research and development costs for companies like Intel and Samsung and Texas Instruments, among others. But the notable part of this is that the federal government is basically just going to be handing over this money with no conditions, meaning that we're going to be footing the bill. This is if Biden passes this. We're going to foot the bill for these businesses' costs without really securing any conditions that might be beneficial to working people or to domestic growth broadly. And this was actually where Bernie Sanders objected to the bill. He was one of the people who voted no on it. And he put out a statement last month that kind of sums up his objection to the bill. So he writes, I'm opposed to this legislation in any form until the following conditions are met. Companies must agree to issue warrants or equity stakes to the federal government. They must commit to not buying back their own stock, outsourcing American jobs overseas, or repealing existing collective bargaining agreements, and they must remain neutral in any union organizing efforts. The demands I'm making are not radical. They are the same conditions that were introduced in the CARES Act, which passed the Senate 96-0. And as many of you probably also remember, many of the companies that benefited from the CARES Act did not actually hold to some of the stipulations that were put in place, notably the airline industry, and would be great if we actually tried to hold them to account. But as another friend of the show, we got a lot of friends around here, but as friend of the show, Matt Brunig highlighted in what's now a deleted tweet, and I can't put it on screen, I would have, just pretend there's a Matt Brunig tweet on screen right now, that it's actually quite extraordinary and unique that American industrial policy doesn't actually make demands on or attach strings to the money that we hand out to businesses.
Yeah.
That typically both with social democratic models and as well as like developmental economic models, typically they involve the state actually disciplining the business community, meaning that like, they're encouraging growth. They want to encourage profitability among their companies, but at the same time, they end up pushing for greater rights and protections for workers, or just like minimally for domestic value-added production, like that the actual like productivity gains are occurring in the country that this money is being doled out. But in neoliberalism, as we all know, the state has basically aided and abetted capitalists making a profit at the expense of nearly everyone and everything else. Mm-hmm. So, our modern capitalist class is cross-national, and they put profits even ahead of their national location. Yeah. And this was actually the thing I want to get to in the Sanders clip, and then we can kind of reflect on what this all means. But this is part of what Senator Sanders was highlighting from the Senate floor.
A little over a week ago, the CEO of Intel, a gentleman named Pat Gelsinger, who earns something like $179 million a year in compensation, not a bad salary. Mr. Gelsinger did an interview on CNBC's Squawk Box program. And I think to listen to that interview tells us everything we need to know about oligarchy and arrogance and the state of American politics.
But my message to our congressional leaders is, hey, if I'm not done with the job, I don't get to go home. Neither should you. Do not go home for August recess until you have passed the CHIPS Act, because I and others in the industry will make investment decisions. And do you want those investments in the U.S., or are we simply not competitiveness to do them here, and we need to go to Europe or Asia for those? Get the job done. Do not go home for August recess without getting these bills passed.
In other words, what he is telling you point blank is, who is the puppet and who is the puppeteer. Don't go home this August until you give us $176 billion, because if you don't do that, we're going to go to Asia and we're going to go to Europe. That's the state of American politics. The CEO of Intel is saying that if you don't give his industry a $76 billion blank check and his particular company up to $30 billion, that despite, no doubt, their profound love for America, I'm sure they got big American flags all over the place, and their patriotism, and their concern for the needs of the military and the healthcare industry, which in fact needs these sophisticated chips, that if we do not give them this bribe, despite their love of America and their concern about our national defense, you heard Senator Cornyn talking about national defense, and he's right. This is a national defense issue. But despite all of that and all of their love for America, they're willing to go to Asia and go to Europe. Madam President, as I said last week, I am thankfully not a lawyer, but that sure sounds like extortion to me.
Bernie at his best. I don't disagree with anything that he said there, obviously. It will surprise nobody to know that I'm very much with Bernie on this. And I think what he points out there in that video is really important. It's the fact that capital has the upper hand and nothing in this bill does anything to change that dynamic whatsoever. And I do want to quickly say, and actually Bernie has admitted this as well, that we actually do need to reinvest in domestic manufacturing. We do need a strong industrial policy. We do need to reshore the production of not just semiconductors, but plenty of other things. That's all well and good. But the problem is when, again, you decide to make these investments with no guardrails. I think that's the language Bernie has been using. No guardrails that ensure worker protections or ensure any kind of check on the power of capital. What you're basically doing is not just corporate welfare, not just giving these companies a blank check, although that is true, but you are basically saying that you expect these companies to do the right thing with the money that they've been given. Right. You expect them to reinvest their profits in their workers, in production, in technology. And guess what? That is the bargain that government has been making with capital for the last 30 to 40 years. And how has that turned out? It hasn't. We have a term for this already. It's trickle-down economics, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's like astounding because this is the exact same thing that's happened, like you're saying, every single time where like the new argument, and we're going to talk about this with Matt Huber in a little bit, like you just give the capitalists, you give business a bunch of money and you say, please invest. We need investment to go up. Please just do the investment. And they don't. Like that they've been pocketing a lot of this, that like this was like the Trump tax cuts. It's all the same thing. It's the Bush tax cuts. Yeah, it's just more and more of the same thing. And it's like you're saying, it largely has to just do with class power. The fact that like the capitalists, the ruling class in this country can say, they can make the threat to government that like, we're going to put production where we need to put production that's going to be the lowest costs and give us the highest profit. And either you play ball with us or fuck you. Mm-hmm. And like, that's not like, we need a different answer to that. Like that's like, we need either public investment. We need to like massively expand what the state is actually producing to actually generate growth and higher wages and productivity here that like, you know, leads to a healthier economy overall to the benefit of working people, especially. Because capitalists are unwilling, like, aside from the fact that, like, there's, yes, of course, like, they're just out for profits, like, they're not even interested in domestic growth. Like, they're willing to sacrifice everyone here. Mm-hmm. And the other point I just want to make very quickly is, like, this isn't like, you know, an American workers versus the global South workers situation or something, mm-hmm. because capitalists are screwing everybody simultaneously right now across the board. Like they're doing this not to, you know, there's nothing generous. It's not even like an accidental outcome of like, you know, benefiting, you know, workers that are being paid like less than starvation wages mm-hmm. in, you know, East Asia or something. Mm-hmm. Like this is like across the board, them getting what they want at all of our expenses.
Right. 100%. Yeah, I mean, on that point, I also just want to add, I think that it is true that Democrats and actually like a lot of leftists and progressives have not paid as much attention as they maybe should have to things like investing in domestic manufacturing, or, I know that there is hesitancy or even resistance in many quarters of the left to embrace any kind of protectionism for fear that it comes off as nationalistic or xenophobic or could like open the door to that, right? I don't agree with that. I think that there is definitely, I think that, as I've been saying, talking about domestic manufacturing and industrial policy and, things like trade and tariffs and stuff, I think that that's something that the left should be taking very seriously. Now, that said, you can't just, reproduce the same kind of neoliberal trickle down structure and then like try to dress it up with the word domestic manufacturing,
Right.
Or I mean, obviously like people are going to try, but I don't know, something to think about.
Yeah. Again, this was like there probably will be some new investment because
Yeah.
of this bill, but like none of it's guaranteed because the
Right.
state completely just took responsibility out of its hands. They're like we need these kinds of strings attached to the money that we dole out. Otherwise, like we're just again the state is just aiding and abetting
Right.
capital and whatever they want.
Right. So what's going to happen? I mean, obviously we can't say, but I think that there's a pretty good reason why Bernie Sanders, who has always been very good on this issue, objected to this bill, despite, all of the Democrats he caucuses with basically support in the Senate supporting the bill, lots of Republicans as well. We'll see, but I kind of feel like history might prove Bernie right yet again.
Just one more time, at least.
Just one last time.
Yeah.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.